come back for episode 2. I had a drummer in the first episode, and this time we have a piper trying to alternate kind of like the different instrument and pipe band. So today we have Liam Kernaghan joining from New Zealand, which is awesome to have people from Canada, Europe, England, Scotland, and then Australia, and then New Zealand. I had 1 or 2 guests in season 1 that were from New Zealand. But yeah, Liam is a piper. We've played together 1-2 years together in a band in Scotland. I'm sure we'll talk about it. But Liam is a super accomplished piper, solo piper in New Zealand. Has won many competitions, solo competitions. Also played in different bands, and we'll learn more about what he's up to now. I know he's judging a little bit, but maybe he's still playing, and what's his plan for the summer and beyond, and just catch up. So Liam, how are you doing?
I'm good, mate. It's good to see you again. I feel like one of the last memories I have of you was getting off the bus at Cowell after Cowell in 2012, after we'd just won the second major of the season. And it seems ridiculous that I haven't seen you or caught up with you properly in over a decade.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's crazy. I was just saying you're from New Zealand. You can hear the accent.
Mhm.
But can you tell us like where you're based, and if that's where you're from? I forgot, you're from Auckland, right?
Yeah. So I'm based in Auckland now. I moved here about a year ago. Before that, I was living in Wellington for about 6 years and working there. But I grew up originally in Dunedin, which is, for those who sort of don't know the geography all that well of New Zealand, it's about a third of the way up the South Island of New Zealand. So grew up there, went to school there, did my university there, and best place in the world. If anyone hasn't visited yet, I strongly encourage you to come out and check it out. It's a beautiful spot.
Love the promo. Love the promo. And then so you didn't move there for pipe band, right? There's no pipe band related to this job, right?
Yeah. So when I finished university, I did a law degree and a politics degree, and so moved to Wellington, which is the capital of New Zealand, and worked in politics for about 6 years, and still working politics adjacent. But I've jumped back into the law side of things at the moment. So yeah, Auckland's great, big city, about 1.6 million people, heaps going on, lots of piping here as well, which is fantastic. So it's keeping me very busy.
Nice. Yeah, I know Auckland district, and but is there more than one band that is based in Auckland?
Yeah, there's about 10 bands based in Auckland, and sort of between grade 1 and grade 4, and you've got a college band here, like a juvenile band here as well. But you've got a lot of solo players here as well. So some of your viewers will know Brian Swatala, who's an RSPBA piping adjudicator. He's based here in Auckland, and Auckland's just got a whole bunch of people. I mean, it's such a big city. There's just heaps of people, so it really is a great
Yeah.
place to do your piping.
Is there like kind of a scene where band, like when you're having in Glasgow or even Edinburgh, where
Mm.
people from different bands sort of get together and chat or have beers and stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, New Zealand's such a small place, and the scene is so much smaller that almost inevitably, wherever you are in New Zealand, people get together. It doesn't matter what band you are, and I think part of it is as well, like we piping and drumming and pipe bands isn't as cultural for New Zealanders as it would be in Scotland or other places. It's not something that we grow up with necessarily. If you're lucky to be born into a piping family, you'll know about it, but it's not something as ingrained in our culture. And so you almost do have to make that effort to catch up and sort of to be social with people. And I mean, after our major competitions, it's almost like the kilt comes off, and it doesn't matter what band you're in, you're all mates and you'll get together and have a good time. And it's very much like that up here in Auckland for sure.
Yeah, I must say, like, I've been super fortunate to travel because of through pipe bands. I've been to New Zealand, Australia, and now North America, and it's New Zealand I was just impressed with how just the community was really supportive to one another. You're right, like maybe the country is smaller than Australia, where it was super hard to know who was doing what and like who is involved with what. And but in New Zealand, I felt like you have the summer school, which you've taught at, and
Mm.
just a lot of it feels from the outside, and having had an experience there that just very friendly and pulling towards the same direction, which I think it's awesome.
Yeah, and I think that's probably part of the sort of Kiwi spirit as well, just the way we are as people. I think we're pretty friendly, pretty open, pretty keen to have people come in and be part of what we're doing. But I think in general, unlike Australia, we have to travel hours and hours and hours to get anywhere. I can just go down the road about an hour and see a whole different group of people, whole different group of pipe bands people, but it's exactly the same atmosphere and vibe. And it's something we really love, and it's something we really value, I think, in New Zealand. And hopefully other people like you value it as well.
Yeah, no, I had a great time. It was awesome. I would definitely go back. Touching back, you mentioned like if you weren't born into a piping family. Were you born into a piping family? Was anyone in your family involved? Like, how did you get started?
Yeah, it's actually really funny because I was back down home in Dunedin about a month ago, and we were talking away about piping because we had our New Zealand solo championships down there this year at the start of June, and so talking to the family and talking to pipers about how we all got into it. And to be honest, there's different stories from my parents about how I got into it. Our family's not musical at all. It's a very much like many New Zealand families, very sport orientated family, and so we all played sport when we were growing up, and that was quite a big part of who you are in New Zealand. But apparently, and this is just one of the stories, I came home from my primary school. I was in my last year of primary school, sort of earlier in the year, and I had this form with me from this bagpipe teacher just from up the road at the high school I ended up going to, saying, we need bagpipers and drummers to learn. And I told my parents, I want to learn the bagpipes. And again, piping and drumming isn't as ingrained in the culture here in New Zealand necessarily as it is overseas. So I think my parents' first reaction was like, "What the, what is going on here?" But from there, I learned from Don Smith, who was the tutor that came along, and I think there was about 20 people in the class that started out, which was quite big because we're only a small town. Dunedin's only about 120,000 people, and so to have 20 young people kind of keen to learn the pipes was pretty cool. And all I remember, and my parents sort of seconded this, is I was always at the bottom of my class. I was like the slowest to learn. I was the laziest. I was the one that didn't get stuff straight away. And so it took me a long time to be able to get given a set of pipes, because you sort of Don was one of these people that said you sort of had to master some of the basics and make sure you're doing things properly before you're given the big instrument. And I think I would have been a solid month or 2 months after the 19th person in my class. But as things always transpire, people drop off, and the group got
Mhm.
smaller over time, and that kind of I ended up being sort of last for a lot of things in my group. So we so so
Oh, I
so
thought
we
you were
ended
the
up.
last one left of the group. No, no,
Well,
you
it sort of
you
ended
were
up a
the
little bit
last.
like that, which is funny because I think we went down to about 5 or 6 and towards like the end of the year or start of the next year. And in New Zealand, the grading system's a little bit different to what it is in Scotland. So you're immediately graded sort of novice in New Zealand when you first start out. And so to get out of novice, you have to win a novice competition. And again, I was the last person in my cohort to win a novice competition. And so yeah, that's kind of how it started. It was a bit random. It probably I probably shouldn't have kept going because, as I say, I wasn't the top guy in the class. I wasn't someone who even looked like he was gonna get anywhere good, or get anywhere at all. So yeah, it was kind of a funny story to the start
And
of
here
my
you are.
piping career. Yeah, exactly. And as I say, look,
So funny.
from that 20, I'm the only one. So here we are.
Wow, that's crazy. So that was purely solos, like, or was it a band? It was a or solo competition.
Yeah, so initially it was obviously just sort of learning the basics and doing the solos. But Don Smith, who was the teacher, he was also the pipe band director at John McGlashan College, which is one of the big pipe band schools in New Zealand, or at least was when I was growing up. And so part of the natural transition was once you mastered the basics, once you got a few tunes under your belt, you were allowed to go and do street parades and things like that with the college band. And I ended up going to the school as well, so it made it a lot easier for me to get into the band. And from there, things kind of took off. And so I was very fortunate to get into to sort of do the basics, get into the solos, but then get into the band sort of straight off the bat there.
What's from there? You were saying like I was always sort of the slowest to learn, and
Mm-hmm.
what made because obviously then you went on to play for the Cali, right? Which is
Mm-hmm.
the main band in Christchurch. Christchurch, yeah. and one of the top band in New Zealand. Like, what happened that you were like, I'm really into this. I want to keep going as far as I can and join one of the best band in the country. Like, did something happen, or you felt like it was gradually just happened?
No, it was. I wouldn't say it was by accident. Stuff kind of happened after that, but I was very fortunate to have a whole series of events sort of happen between probably the age of 14 and 18. And so when I was about 14, and I was getting better, but still pretty lazy, pretty slow. A guy who people again will probably know on your show, Stuart Easton, moved to Dunedin, and he took over as the pipe band director from Don Smith because he had a few health issues, and so Stu Easton took over the band, and he was much closer in age. In fact, Stu and I are almost exactly 10 years old. Well, Stu's 10 years older than me, almost to the day, and so he was like 23, 24. He was at the top of his sort of level at that stage as well in New Zealand. He's playing with Manawatu Scottish, which at the time was the sort of New Zealand champion band. And so he just instilled so much energy. And I wouldn't say Don didn't instill the energy, but it's just for young people, having that as someone who's similarly young and passionate and fired up, just really instilled so much energy and passion into it. And I was like, well, yeah, I want to be like this guy. I want to be like the guy that gets to travel to Scotland each year, or travel to Australia, or do all that stuff. And so I don't know if the saying exists in the UK as well, but I sort of pulled finger, which means sort of got my A into G and started working hard. And the John McGlashan College Pipe Band had a lot of success when Stu was the musical director or pipe band director. We were New Zealand juvenile champions for a couple of years, and doing really well in the grade 3 competition here in New Zealand. And so I was really fortunate for Stu, and that's also sort of when the solo stuff started taking off for me as well. I got much more into pibroch. I got my technique sorted out. There was a whole bunch of stuff that sort of fell into line. So
Mm-hmm.
I guess from there, I spent a little bit of time with the City of Dunedin Pipe Band, which was a grade 2 pipe band based in the city, and was fortunate enough to win a couple of grade 2 national championships with them while I was still at school. The school pipe band sort of had taken a bit of a hiatus because Stu had finished and there was a bit of uncertainty about what was happening. But from there, I obviously got a lot more, around the games around New Zealand, started competing, started meeting people. And it was kind of during that period I got to know and meet Richard Hawke, who at the time was, who had just taken over as the pipe major of the Canterbury Caledonian band. And I'd always been, and still am to this day, just a massive fan of Richard and his playing and his leadership, and just so much of how he approaches bagpipes and pipe bands. And so when he took over, I'd just started university. I'd just started my law degree and things like that. But I knew I wanted to play for Richard. I knew I wanted to be part of what I could see was quite special, because at that time James Lachlan had also just taken over as the drum
Mm-hmm.
sergeant of Canterbury. So for me it was one of those kind of, the stars are aligning, things are falling into place, and I just really wanted to be part of it. So I ended up starting the 4.5 hour journey from Dunedin to Christchurch to get to band practice and things like that. And to be fair, I
Damn.
mostly flew, but it was the start of something really special, and something I've just been so grateful to have had the opportunity to do.
Right, right, right. It's funny how like to hear the journey. I'm sure a lot of people would probably connect with something quite similar, but having um someone that is roughly the same age or same dynamic, it's so important to kids to get that sort of like oh wow, like I reflect a lot into what this person is doing, or I want to be that person, I want to be like that person. And I think it works for sports, it works for music, it works for anything. And you must have been like going to your first few games or a competition in New Zealand and be like, oh my god, like there's a whole scene out here that's amazing, people my age doing extremely well, or playing in big bands, like I can do this, right? So it probably yeah, it helped. That's crazy.
That's absolutely right, and the thing is as well, you sort of grow up in this little city, and for a long time, we didn't travel a hell of a lot to do the solos, and so once Stu kind of introduced us to this big wider world of New Zealand and what was going on, it was just kind of like almost like a light bulb, light switch moment of just like, wow, this is something really cool that I could be part of.
Right, right, right. And then, so from there, from what I know, It's sort of easier with you because I know a little bit, but like from there, you started going to Scotland with the band, right? Because I when I was playing with Scott and Ali's band in Cargill,
Mhm.
the Cali was like the best band. I mean, James was leading drummer, and you were part of the band, and it was clearly like we're going to work really hard and to go to the Worlds and play at the World's Piping Championship. Was this your first trip to Scotland with that band, or you had been before because you were curious about doing solos or stuff like that?
No, I'd never been before, and so part of the draw card, because Richard was so good and James and everything was lighting up, but also Richard had made it really clear that a big focus would be we're going to go to Scotland, we're going to take this seriously, it's going to be a big part of what we do and who we are, and so for me, I'd always wanted to go. I remember looking on pipes drums as a kid and watching all the results come in, and this was, by the way, this is like the 2000s, right? So this is, and New Zealand's a wee bit behind the times. So this is before we had proper like ultra fast broadband and things like that. So you'd sit there for hours and watch the YouTube download slowly so you could watch some of the majors and things like that. But I remember it being such a big kind of driver for me. I was like, I really want to go and see what this is like, and it had Stu Easton tell me how amazing it was, and a whole bunch of others. And so for the band, it was something that everyone bought into, and so it was for a lot of us our first trip. That 2010 trip when we first went across was the first kind of opening for Scottish piping and pipe bands, and kind of understanding what it was all about. And then on the other side, it was just figuring out how good everyone was and how much work we needed to do in subsequent years to get up to that standard. Because as you'll know, New Zealand's got some fantastic solo pipers and it's got some really good pipe bands, but Scotland's just that next level. And so although that was pretty daunting, it's also was just a massive driver for the band to just try and get better and try and be up with the big boys there.
Yeah, yeah. I imagine how was it like? Um, what's your best memory of that sort of period where the band was working really hard? You had joined the band. I guess everything. I love to ask that and try to picture myself into entering the room. I mean, I remember when I first joined, rather the band in Brittany with the sort of the adult band, and then Boghall with the drum corps at the time. It was just like wow, it was amazing. I have so many great memories. How was it for you joining that band, seeing how into just pipe band that band was at the time and or still is, and then going to Scotland, like in listening to the top band. It's probably the first time you were listening to those big bands in Scotland for the first time, right? So live.
Absolutely, and like so, I remember when I first stepped into the Canterbury Band Hall, and this was after we went to Scotland the first time, and then before we went the second time, there was the big Christchurch earthquakes in 2011, and so a lot
Right.
changed for the band in that period of time, just physically as well as mentally and things like that. But I remember going into the old band rooms for the first time, and there was this group of people who I sort of knew, but hadn't really had much to do, and Richard had managed to bring in so many top players, into that band, his sons and for instance, who now I'm really good friends with. And I just remember being like, how lucky am I to be able to play with not only, amazing players, but some just really cool people. And I remember we were so fired up for 2010. We were like, this is going to be great. We're going to go over. We're going to have a good time, competition wise. But we get our best and all that kind of stuff. And I remember getting to North Berwick, which was our first contest in 2010, and it was pouring with rain, and it was like 10 degrees, and everyone was in capes, and it was just such an unusual vibe because although we'd come from winter, it was still reasonably warm and reasonably decent and not too wet. And I just remember being like, God, is this what Scotland's like? Is this what we've got to put up with for forever and ever and ever? And it turns out not too far from the truth. But I remember that 2010 trip just being a huge learning curve for the band because, as I say, although we were doing all right in New Zealand and we were in sort of the top part of that grade one contingent, we had a lot of work to do. I think we must have finished. I think there was 18 or 17 bands in that grade one qualifier. I think we might have finished like 13th or 14th. And so it was a huge humbler for the band just to be like, we've got a lot of work to do, but also huge learning experience for us. And then, after that, almost immediately, as soon as we got back from Scotland, the first Christchurch earthquake happened, and that was the one that didn't do a lot of damage, but it set the scene for the one in early 2011, which did all of the damage.
Mm-hmm.
And I just remember that being like, that was another whole thing that the band had to deal with. We lost our band hall, which was a big old building in the middle of Christchurch. Band members were losing their homes, they were losing their businesses, some band members lost family members in the earthquake. And so I don't know whether that was a catalyst for anything. It may very well have been something that helped us focus, because what was incredible, immediately after the earthquake, which was right before the Nationals, actually. I think it was about 2 weeks just before the National Championships, which were due to be held just down the road. I basically brought the band together we were already a pretty close family, but almost tighter. We were going around to people's houses and cleaning up all the silt, all the stuff that was coming out of the ground. We were going around and helping people get stuff out of their houses they couldn't use anymore. We were housing band members. It really, in some respects, looking back at it, brought the band together in a way which it hadn't before. And so, those things are never fortunate, because it cost lives, it cost money, it cost a whole bunch of things. But from there, from 2012 onwards, the band really took off, and we had some incredible years both at home and abroad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, wow, that's a powerful story, and sometimes you're right. Like events like this, can make or break, and make in a way that it brings the band together tighter. Like we went through tough moments, so we can definitely, relate to all that kind of stuff. That's crazy. That's amazing to hear. And when was the moment where because you spent a few months in Scotland when it was at 2012, it must have been 2012. Was it just 1 year, or you did 2 years? Because I remember.
No, I just did the 1 year. Well,
oh, you just did that 1 year. Oh, right. Okay.
Well, so that story is also kind of one of those. I was very fortunate, and things kind of lined up quite well. So it must have been 2010, actually. During the summer of 2010, Andrew Ray, who was a piper in Boghall at the time, was doing his residency for his medical degree, and he spent 3 months in Christchurch. So this was definitely pre-earthquake, because I remember he was living right in the middle of the city, and then obviously after the earthquake, the middle of the city didn't exist anymore. So he was here for 2010 and played in the band. We got along really well. He was like, look, if you're ever in Scotland, you should come and give it a crack. And I was like, oh yeah, I'm very much still at the start of my journey. And at that stage, I hadn't done any solos in Scotland at all. I remember, this is kind of a side note to that, but I remember, we were going to Scotland, and I was like, oh God, I'd love to play the solos. So I remember emailing Richard Hawke and Greg Wilson, who's obviously one of New Zealand's best ever solo pipers. And I was like, I really want to play the solos in Scotland. I really want to play at Oban and Inverness. How do I make that happen? And Greg's like, there's a long way to go here, buddy. You've got there's a lot of water to go under the bridge before you do that. So I hadn't even started, doing the solos at that stage. But it was the end of 2011, and we went to the Worlds again in 2011. Even though we had the earthquakes, it was something the band felt that we should do, and it was a good thing for the band to sort of put their minds at ease, or sort of take their minds off the earthquake. And it was one of those kind of unusual years where the Worlds was just slightly more than 2 weeks difference from Cal, and obviously you've got the 2 week stand down period between Grade 1 bands. And so Andrew was like, this could be your opportunity to come and play at Cal with the band. It's an MSR contest this year, and the tunes are really similar, if not exactly the same as what we were playing in the Canterbury band. And so I was like, what have I got to lose? I'm still in Scotland. I was doing some of the minor games there, and I was actually leaving the day after Cal in 2011. And so, we again in 2011 we didn't qualify. I think we were 7th, I think, in the qualifier that year, and so pretty close, but still didn't qualify. So, I think within an hour of finishing the qualifier, I had signed out of Canterbury and signed into Boghall. It was all signed.
Oh, because you had 2 weeks.
And so yeah. So there was. I think we had 2 weeks in one day or something. It was something crazy. Anyway, I remember signing up, but at that time, Ross Walker, who was the pipe major of Boghall at the time, I'd met, but he was like, I haven't heard you play, so, come and play. So I went down to the school. I think it was like the Monday or the Tuesday after the Worlds or whenever the first band practice was, and got the pipes out, played two parts of a 6/8, and he's like, you'll be right. Let's get on with it. And so I stayed in
Nice.
Scotland for that little period, and then played with the band at Cowell, which was incredible. I was 21 at that stage, and for a little fella from New Zealand who had barely spent any time in Scotland, let alone played with any of those top bands, I was kind of at the, trying to keep that awestruck, starstruck kind of feeling down, because it was, it's obviously builds you up a bit. But I think we got third that year at Cal, and so for me, I was just like overwhelmed. I was just like, this is amazing. How on earth is this possible? And I remember having just an incredible trip. And then Ross said, well, if the band's not coming over in 2012, which Canterbury wasn't planning on coming over, why don't you come and do more of the season? We've got the concert in 2012. It's our 40th anniversary that year. It'll be a pretty special year. And I remember going back home, and I was still obviously doing my law degree. And so I spoke to the university, spoke to my family. I was like, this is something I think I really want to do. It's a great opportunity. And everyone was just like, you've got to do it. These things don't come up very often, if ever. And so I remember saying to Ross, yep, I'm in. I'll come across for, hopefully for, a couple of weeks before the Europeans, and then stay right through till Cowell again. So that would mean I get 3 majors in, concert, and go home. But again, I guess best laid plans don't always go according to those plans. And so I was due to fly out of New Zealand the weekend before the Europeans, and very, very tight timeframes again. It was like I was really pushing it in terms of getting across the line there. But my plane from Christchurch to Sydney broke down in Christchurch, so I was delayed a day. Flew from Christchurch to Sydney, plane broke down again in Sydney, so I was delayed another day. So instead of getting into Scotland on the Saturday before the Europeans in Belfast, I think I arrived like Tuesday morning, Tuesday lunchtime or something like that before the Europeans. So not the greatest of preparations, but as it turns out, that season was absolutely undoubtedly one of the highlights of my piping career for sure.
Yeah, that is it's awesome to hear. Obviously, I can relate to that because I was also flying for the band at the time, and I think a lot of people are, just flying. And we talked about it, but there are 2 people from New Zealand playing with Boghall this season, and you hear all the time. You see through Facebook, people in North America, they're playing for top bands and they're traveling to majors, and from the outside, you might be like, this is awesome, but this is kind of weird. Like, why would you do all of that just to play for a band? But then hearing your story and how exciting it was and what it brought to your life and experience altogether. I mean, you got to live in Scotland for a few weeks and have Aaron brew and drink some meet friends and do good stuff that you would probably not do in New Zealand. I mean, it's like life experience, right? So also happened to be an amazing season. So that was a plus too. But do you think it changed the way you approach piping or even like bands in general? Like, what would be like a massive takeaway that after those weeks in Scotland you came back to New Zealand and you felt like you grew up as a person?
Yeah, absolutely, and so we were really fortunate that year. Obviously, we won the Europeans at Belfast that year. We won Cowell again. Well, we won Cowell later on. I think we were 4th at the Worlds, but the drum corps, obviously, you guys had an incredibly successful season. I think it was 4 out of 5 of the majors you ended up winning, which was incredible. It wasn't. I mean, the winning's great, right? The winning feels really good, and the winning was a very special moment, particularly, as I say, coming in on the Tuesday, getting to Belfast, playing. It was surreal, right? And similarly, the concert was just a surreal thing. Again, I was 22, right, and I'd never experienced anything on that level. But for me, the winning was amazing, but it was understanding and being part of a group and being part of that whole sort of pipe band movement at the top level, where it's so focused and it's so much more part of your life than I think it maybe is here at home in New Zealand. It's something people don't just do as like a side hobby, which might exist in New Zealand. It's your life. You start things revolve around band practice, or things revolve around majors, or things revolve around your piping career. And for me, it was kind of like, well, if I want to take this really seriously, if I want to get really good, it's got to be something that I dedicate myself to. It's got to be something that I make more than just a hobby that I do sometimes. And so it really did, change things for me in terms of stepping up a level, in terms of what I was trying to focus on, and some of the decisions I made about life as well, because for New
Right.
Zealanders, it's literally the other side of the world. The UK is basically as far away from New Zealand as you can possibly get. And so it's not just like going down the road half an hour to band practice. For me, it was like a 36-hour journey to get to band practice for Boghall. And so for us, there's a lot more, I think, that you've got to take into consideration when you do this kind of thing. But I absolutely do not regret it, because I've just had such a wonderful journey. And so that year was really a watershed moment, I think, for me in terms of my piping career and what I wanted to achieve. And again, I've, as you touched on, very lucky to have met some amazing people. Definitely got into the solos in that 2012 year, and since then, and so just just incredibly lucky to meet amazing people, have incredible experiences, and then just realize this is something I want to do for the rest of my life.
Right. Yeah. Do you think you had a moment that you were like, I always like to ask people that it's, especially when you get to that level, you play in the top band, you practice, twice, 3 times a week with the band. Is there a moment where you were like, I think I want to do this as my main job? Like, I want to teach, I want to play full time. Did you ever wonder?
I've on and off always sort of thought that. It's not been something. I mean, again, New Zealand obviously a lot smaller place, and so there's only very few opportunities for that. But I do remember, actually referenced at the start of this, getting off the bus after Cowell in 2012, and we had an amazing season, and I was saying goodbye to everyone, and I remember I was staying with family in Glasgow, and for one night, because I was flying home the next day, and I was like, I don't really want to leave. I don't want to get on that plane back to New Zealand. I could always just not show up at the airport, and there's been many times in my career where I've thought, I should just be in Scotland. I should be there all the time. It is it is hard, right? Because we only get to go across to Scotland maybe once, if you're very lucky, twice a year, and it's only for a certain amount of time. So you're sort of limited very much in terms of how much you get to do in Scotland, how much exposure to the Scottish scene that you have. And so for us, it is very much kind of doing it year on year. And so, there's been many New Zealand bagpipers and drummers, and as you said, you've got 2 in the band right now who go across and do a stint and absolutely love it. But I definitely remember that after getting off the bus after Cowell in 2012, being like, I could do this, I could just live in Scotland forever. And maybe, I sort of look back and say maybe I should have. But then again, I'm one of these people that sort of sits there and says, I don't have regrets in life. I make calls, I make decisions, and I get on with it. And so equally, I've just been lucky since then to have some incredible opportunities, traveling to Scotland each year, being with the band, getting into the judging a little bit more here in New Zealand and in Australia, and just keeping at it in the solos over there.
Right. It's funny when you say I could just stay and live in Scotland forever until the winter hit and it's dark and raining for a month, and you're like, actually, it's not bad. No offense to everyone living in Scotland, but that's how I felt. Every time I was like, God, I love, I could just stay there, and then I know winters are just brutal. So yeah, touching on what you were just saying, like, what are you up to now? You're not playing, I think, but I saw you judging. So is this your new thing? You transitioned to just playing solos and judging, or just judging?
Yeah, so I'm still definitely doing the solos. So and going across, actually it must be 6 weeks today for the solos for this season in Scotland as well. But
Awesome.
So in 2017. Richard Hawke and James Lockton made the call to step back from leading the band, and we were devastated because everyone thought there's still a hell of a lot more in the tank, but when the time's right, the time's right. And so there was a leadership change, and Richard's son Jamie took over as pipe major, and I was his pipe sergeant for a couple of years, and we had a great time. The band was in great shape, and we won the 2019 New Zealand Championships, which was an incredible experience to be part of. Went to the Worlds and did okay. We were still very much doing our thing, but at the end of 2019, I had an opportunity to run for Parliament, so to stand for the election in 2020 for the National Party here in New Zealand, which is kind of like the major centre-right political party. And so for me, I sort of had to make one of those very difficult life choices about what I could do and what I couldn't do. And so I made the decision to step back from the band at that stage. So ran for election, didn't go so well because of COVID, so didn't win, but kept doing the solos and then got more into the judging. So still very much doing all the solo stuff, as I say, going back to Scotland this year. But I've definitely been doing more judging here in New Zealand of the bands. And so I've judged now 2 New Zealand championships, 2021 and 2023, the most recent one. And I was just recently in Queensland, in Brisbane, for their Queensland State Championships, which was great. It's Australia is just such a massive place that you never get to see all of it at once. But there were a couple of bands that came up from New South Wales, which is quite far away, and so that was awesome. And I sort of see the opportunity to judge as giving back to the community that I've gained so much from. I've learned so much and had so many awesome opportunities and experiences that if I can give back in a small way by supporting and judging and doing what I can, I see that as adding benefit or giving back in a way that I wouldn't otherwise be doing.
Right. That's amazing. You're surprised? Are you you surprise yourself kind of enjoying the judging part, or it happened so greatly that just you were like, this is actually fine? Or you were like, oh wow, actually I'm really enjoying this probably more than playing.
I don't know if I'm enjoying it more than playing. I mean, I sit there, and actually this year at the Nationals, in the Grade 1, the standard was really good. It was a big step up in the Grade 1 from years past, and you're sort of sitting there going, listening away and doing bits and pieces and writing, and you're like, you definitely miss parts of it. But I guess for me, what I'm doing now with work and politics and stuff like that, it's just not feasible to be able to be at band practice, each week, or commit yourself to going to the Worlds each year, or doing all of that. And so I do enjoy the judging, because I think, you get to hear bands from a position that no one else really does. You're either miles away behind the bars, or you're listening on the live stream, whereas when you're judging, you're right there, you get to hear it all. And I sort of come at it from a position where I sort of find that some people sit there and judge, and they're trying to find all the negatives and stuff, and obviously your job is to figure out one to whatever, but you're also there to appreciate the music. You're also there to sit there and say, these guys have worked pretty bloody hard, and just enjoy it. And so I'm enjoying that aspect. I'm very much enjoying being able to hear what bands are doing, the creativity, the incredible sounds that some bands here in New Zealand are getting now. But equally, I do miss it. I miss the camaraderie of being in a band. I miss the banter. I miss the hard work, weirdly.
Right.
And I do miss, I do miss a lot of that, going to the Worlds and competing and doing that stuff, for sure.
Right. But you get a front row seat when you're a judge, so that's pretty cool.
That's
right. Not bad. Before we wrap up, I want to talk about something that is non-piping related. You mentioned you almost, you were into politics, which is something that I don't know anyone else that is as good as, or, very at a high level, playing at a high level in piping, and then also very much involved into politics, which is, I don't know, something that maybe I'm not with the right kind of people around me, but this is quite awesome, impressive. Was it something that you've always wanted to do? Now you transitioned to being more into the law side of things, but was it something you've always been interested in?
I guess it was. I wouldn't say my family was a super political family, but mum and dad, when we were around the dinner table, definitely had like views and stuff like that. And we always talked about stuff. And one of my best mates growing up, who also, funnily enough, played in the pipe band with me, his stepmom was a member of parliament here in New Zealand. And so I got to know her really well and help her out when I was like 15, 16, like handing out balloons and putting pieces of mail out in people's letterboxes. And so I remember going to university, and I never actually wanted to do law, but I ended up doing it because dad and I had this conversation, and dad kind of had a bet with me that I wouldn't get into law school. And so being an 18-year-old dumb kid, I was like, yeah, no, I'm gonna show dad. So I ended up doing that, but politics was always kind of my real interest, in terms of what kind of drove me and being part of it. And so I was really fortunate when I finished university to go straight into politics. I guess I was working in the capital in New Zealand and working for one of our top ministers in like a political advisory role. And for me, I just kind of got the bug even more. I loved the environment. I loved the opportunity to do things for people. Whether people necessarily thought what I was doing or what we were doing was a good thing or not kind of didn't matter. It was the ability to kind of get stuff done.
No
And so
judgment.
no, exactly. And look, and the thing is, I very much sort of see politics as, everyone's got their views and everyone's got differences of opinion and stuff like that. And so I've just loved it. It's taken me all over the world. I've been lucky to travel a lot in New Zealand with it, and still keep involved day to day as much as I can. I've still got friends who work in it now, and the journey to becoming maybe a member of parliament someday isn't dead just yet. 2020 was obviously the COVID year, and it was pretty tough, but it'll never die. So someday, you never know. But I mean, part of it is as well, coming back to the piping thing a little bit. Once you make that life decision to do it full time, and if you do become a member of parliament, piping would take a bit of a side step in some
Right.
respects. And for me, I'm not ready for that yet. I'm still loving competing in the solos. I'm still loving what I'm doing. And so I don't want to give that part of my life up just yet. And so if I have to wait a few more years to have another crack, then that's fine, because I'm loving what I'm doing right now for sure.
That's awesome. Yeah. Before we wrap up, is there like what's next? What's next for you, both in piping or in your life? Or so you're saying you're going to Scotland, which I'm to see you, which is great. You're heading to Scotland for the Worlds, I imagine, and then some solos. What else do you have in a pipeline?
Yeah, so it's actually a really exciting time for us. So I'm as well as doing my stuff and my judging and blah blah blah, I also lead the promotions group for the Royal New Zealand Pipe Bands Association. So all of our digital work, all of our promotional material, everything that we do. And we're in the process of developing a documentary following the 4 New Zealand bands that are going to Scotland this year. So Manawatu, Canterbury, Auckland and District, and St Andrews College from Christchurch. And so we're doing a full documentary of their trip, the challenges, why they're doing it, a whole thing. And so first week that I'm there, I'm supporting documentary, just making sure the cameras aren't getting in the circle and pissing people too much off, and then it'll be on to Oban and Inverness for the solos, doing a few other little bits and pieces, and then back home. And our general election is in October, so there's a little bit behind the scenes that I'm doing there, but it's a busy time and it's exciting. And if I I'm 32 now and still loving everything I'm doing. And the opportunity to go to Scotland this year, for 2 years, New Zealanders couldn't leave, the country. Our borders were shut, and to get back into the country if you left was impossible. So when I went back last year for the first time, it was incredible. Just seeing old friends and hearing bands again. And, the weather helped a lot because it was so hot and so sunny. But this year I'm really looking forward to going back and being part of it and playing and competing and just catching up with everyone.
That's awesome. Yeah, I hope everyone listening can feed off the energy that you're always pushing and seeing what's next. And sure, there's things that happen in your life circumstances that made get to the top and play with top bands. But it feels also listening to you that you you push for these things to happen, right? And that's awesome to hear. I didn't know you guys were doing video and following the band, or that you were part of the sort of the New Zealand Association. And when I see the live stream, it feels again from the outside that there are a lot happening, and things that are exciting. You know, the live stream or the competition and the videos and stuff. It's great to hear from the outside. So kudos for that. It's awesome.
Awesome.
Yeah, cool. Well, I know it's early for you, and by the way, I forgot to mention we didn't plan any of the black hoodie situation here, but
No, we didn't.
we didn't. It was just, totally a surprise. But yeah, thank you so much for jumping in and chatting. It's been many years, so it's great, and I'm looking forward to seeing you at the Worlds in Glasgow. And yeah, thank you again for jumping in. Appreciate it.
Can't wait, mate. It's going to be great.
Yeah, sounds good. Take it easy.
See you.